Chapter 5. The Mysteries of the Kingdom. When we inquire as to the greatest need of mankind, our answer must invariably be to know more and more of the truth, and this answer is based upon the principle that it is the increased understanding of truth that alone can provide the human soul with those essentials that are required to the living of life and the fulfillment of destiny. The need of more and more truth has been deeply felt in every soul at every time, and therefore we find the human race constantly in search of the truth, although it is quite evident that the majority do not realize most of the time why they do not want to know the truth. The soul, however, does know, and it is this prompting from within that causes the mind to go out in every direction and employ every possible means to the end that a greater measure of truth may be realized. The truth that we may now know at any particular time, provided it is all the truth that we can understand at the time, will satisfy our purpose for the living of the full life in that special period. But the very moment we come to a place where the needs of life have been enlarged and made more extensive, we shall feel at once the need of a greater measure of truth. This leads the soul into an attitude that we all have experienced, an attitude that may be described as the hungering and thirsting for something within, or for something higher that we do not seem able at the time to gain possession of. But what we really do want at those times is more truth. And the moment we find the greater truth we are in search of, the soul is satisfied, and the greater needs of life, for the moment, are perfectly fulfilled. When we examine the relationship that the knowing of truth sustains to the living of life, we find that the truth of today is for today only, and that new truth and a greater measure of truth becomes absolutely necessary as the soul grows or advances into larger and higher states of existence. We find, therefore, that whenever a new step is taken, or something higher is undertaken, the truth that we have now known in the past will prove insufficient. We find that we must have new truth, and that we must gain a higher and a larger understanding of life before we can proceed with the new step or undertaking in view. However, if we do not succeed at once in gaining this larger understanding, we shall experience a deep dissatisfaction with almost everything in life. And we have all had this experience at various times, but now we know what it means, and we can avoid such experience in the future if we will make proper provisions for the greater needs of the future by learning to search the truth in all places, and by learning the art of entering into a higher understanding of truth according to the demands of human advancement. In our search for the truth in the past, we have confined ourselves almost exclusively to ways and methods that have been more or less uncertain. That is, we have not developed a definite system for the seeking of truth, or for the finding of truth, and this is especially true of spiritual truth. Accordingly, the race has not advanced spiritually to any degree of satisfaction, although great advancement has been made along other lines, because the search of truth in the material world has been carried on more thoroughly, according to science and system. The soul must have more truth, however, and therefore we find large masses of people coming at frequent times to places where they do not know where to turn, because the understanding of the past does not serve any longer, and they do not know how to find the greater understanding that is demanded. In brief, they wish to discard old conditions and old beliefs, but do not know where to go for new ones. Therefore, they find themselves in conditions that are anything but favorable to the highest welfare of man. We find that this very thing has happened in history again and again, and during such seasons of change and uncertainty, there have been prolonged periods of spiritual darkness. The cause of this we can readily understand, because when the light of the past proves insufficient, and the greater light desired is not at hand, the soul must of necessity find itself in a state of darkness, or at least in a state of confusion, and mental confusion almost invariably produces more or less spiritual darkness. To avoid this, because it should be avoided by all means, we must seek to work out a more definite system for the search of the greater and the greater truth, as demanded by the growth and advancement of the soul. In brief, we must provide for ourselves a method of growth in the truth that will enable us to continue in the spiritual light constantly, without meeting at any time those periods that invariably follow when the supply for the higher is not at hand to provide for greater demand. We all realize the situation and the needs of such situation, but the question is, how a more thorough system can be provided through which we may find for each day all the truth that we need for that day. But here we must remember that it is not a system of belief that we are in search for. We do not desire systems of belief, but rather a definite system for mental and spiritual growth into a higher and higher understanding of truth. The finding of such a system, however, will not prove so much difficult as we might think, because we have the principle in our very midst. When we look into the material world, we find that in that world a perfect system has been evolved for the search of more and more truth, and that system is based upon the scientific method, a method which is practically infallible, and which can be applied in any domain, even the spiritual domain. The value of the scientific method in the material world becomes very evident when we discover the fact that the world knew practically nothing about the material universe previous to the coming of the scientific method. But since that method has been employed so extensively in connection with all visible and tangible objects and forces, the material universe has become almost like an open book. We can read nearly all its secrets at the present time, and its mysteries are no longer hidden, but have been clearly revealed to all intelligent minds. The fact is that the scientific method has revealed the material universe to us in such a wonderful manner that we are now able to perform miracles almost every day in connection with tangible forces and elements, and still we realize that we are simply in the beginning of real knowledge in connection with material things. The discoveries that have been made in connection with the tangible and the inventions that have been perfected are nothing less than extraordinary, but greater things in connection with the visible universe will be evolved and perfected from this time on, because we are learning to apply the scientific method more perfectly every day and upon a much larger scale. The advancement and the changes that have been made upon the physical side of life since the scientific method appeared have been so numerous and so wonderful that we really do not appreciate them all. The reason is we have become so accustomed to miracles in everyday life that we do not stop to consider the principles and laws through which all these things have been accomplished. Those principles and laws, however, are based upon the scientific method, and it is that method that deserves the credit for every comfort and every mode of advancement in life that we enjoy at the recent time. Realizing this great fact, the question is, if we can apply the same method to the spiritual universe, we have searched the mysteries of the physical kingdom, and we have found thousands of invaluable facts. We are finding more and more every day, and we are working them out in a practical manner for the greatest good of man. But can we understand the mysteries of the spiritual kingdom in the same way? Can we enter the vastness of higher realms and find greater and greater truth in these realms through the same method that we have employed in the physical or tangible world? If we can, then the mysteries of the kingdom will not be mysterious much longer. We shall soon learn to understand them all and gain possession of wisdom such as we have never dreamed. We are all familiar with the physical side of science, and our minds have been so engrossed in this physical side that we have never paused to ask ourselves the question if there might not be another side to science, a side that would relate itself directly to the spiritual realm. For this reason, we have failed to appreciate the power of the scientific method in connection with higher and finer things. But now we know that there is another side to science, and that this other or higher side can be applied as successfully in the spiritual world as the physical side of science has been applied in the tangible world. However, we do not refer to any special kind of science, but refer to the scientific principle itself, without any modifications or specifications whatever. That is, it is the idea involved in the scientific method, the only method known for the finding of truth, with which we are concerned, and we have now come to the conclusion that it is pure science that we must apply, not only to the physical, but to the metaphysical, and also to the spiritual, if we would know all the truth and place ourselves into a position where we can constantly rise in the understanding of a greater and greater measure of truth. Appreciating this fact, the problem will be how to apply the scientific method in the search of truth in the spiritual world. The great mastermind declared, "It is for you to know the mysteries of the kingdom," but until recently we did not give serious attention to that remarkable statement, and the reason may possibly be found in the fact that our spiritual needs had not come before sufficiently strong to arouse our minds in a manner where we really could not tolerate our limitations any longer. In recent times, however, most of us have come to places where we felt that we simply would have to secure new light, and the whole world almost is in that position at the present time. Nearly everyone feels the need of a new life and a higher state of existence, but the majority do not know how to proceed in the search of what the souls demand. They have a fear of going out upon the seeming void, not realizing that the seeming void is nothing less than a greater world of substantial and finer reality. But there are many who have eliminated that fear, and who have begun to get upon the seeming void, finding there the solid rock of greater truth, as all will do who take that most important step. We must remember that in the search of truth there is no need of having fear of anything, because while we are in the search of truth we cannot go astray. If it is the truth that we want, and if we are applying the best methods that we know, we shall gain at least a measure of greater truth, and we will not go astray. We will not be lost even though we leave behind us all the beliefs of the past. We need not think that we will enter the desert of uncertainty simply because we leave the lesser in search of the greater. For the fact is, we cannot go very far in any direction if we are in search of truth, without finding something that will prove of greater value for the advancement and the enrichment of life than anything we possessed before. Our ruling purpose, therefore, from this time on should be to go more and more into the vastness of the higher and greater realm of the spiritual world, knowing that the farther we go into the world, the more truth we shall find. And as we grow into truth, life will become richer, fuller, more enjoyable, and more beautiful. And in addition, we shall become living examples to the thousands who are in search of those higher things that we have found. When we consider the mysteries of the kingdom, we must remember that we are dealing purely with the spiritual side of life, and we must realize that the spiritual side, or the seeming unreal, is the most real of all states of existence. There is far greater reality in the life of the spirit than there is in the life of the material. Indeed, it is only in the spiritual that we find reality in its true state of being. And when we realize this, then it is that we shall begin to gain not only a higher understanding of all life, but a greater degree of mastery both of the mental world and of the material world. We are subject to physical conditions only so long as we continue to believe that the body is more real than the soul. The very moment, however, that we know absolutely that the soul is more real than the body, then the soul will begin to gain mastery over the body. And when the soul does gain mastery over the body, all imperfect conditions in the physical life must disappear. The principle is the same as that of turning on the light. When the light comes, then darkness must go. We find that physical conditions are always similar to the nature of the spiritual expression that is taking place at any particular time. That is, if the spiritual expression in your life is full and complete, every condition in your body will, of necessity, be full and complete, or similar to the expression of the spirit. And as the spirit is always in a state of harmony, peace, health, wholesome, and the fullness of life, conditions in the physical life must be the same when the spiritual expression is full and perfect. The spirit is always in a state of divine perfection. Therefore, we must of necessity conclude that the body would enjoy the same state of divine perfection if the expression of the soul were full and complete during every moment of personal existence. The reason why there are imperfect conditions on the physical side of mind and body is because the spiritual expression of life is only partial in most individuals, and in a great many individuals the spiritual expression is actually insignificant, so that it can hardly be spoken of as a true expression. That is, the soul is simply passively alive in a great majority of people, and really does not express itself or its qualities in any form or manner. And the cause of this condition is due to the fact that we have looked upon the body as more real than the soul. Herewith we must remember that so long as we live in the belief that the body is more real than the soul will be looked upon in our consciousness as a negative factor. It will simply be passive, because our material belief does not permit of active expression from the spiritual side. And when we look at the life of a great majority, we discover at once that the spiritual life in them, all is purely passive. Life in them is simply a state of existence. They do not live in the true sense of the term. They do not express real life, and the expression of the spiritual or the divine reality within them has not begun. It is true, however, that the very moment material belief is eliminated, spiritual expression will begin. But we do not eliminate material belief until we begin to live in the soul, and we begin to live in the soul the very moment we realize that the soul is more real than either mind or body. It is this very place that we find the parting of the ways in the life of every individual, or the beginning of a new order of things in the world of any individual. When the human entity begins to realize that the spiritual side is more real than the physical side, consciousness will begin to function more definitely upon the spiritual side. That is, life will be lived, not from the body, but from the soul. And when we live in the soul and from the soul, we will give expression to the ever-increasing measure of life, wisdom and spiritual power. When we consider our past consciousness, we remember that our consciousness existence was concerned almost entirely with the outer life of the personality. That is, we really lived in the body and looked upon the soul as a vague something that no one could understand. We could consciously feel the existence of the body, but we did not have any conscious realization of the existence of the soul. We possibly believed that we had a soul, but it was merely a belief, and we did not possess sufficient conscious realization of the spiritual life to prove to ourselves that such a life had actual existence. In the present age, however, a large percentage have come to a wonderful change in consciousness. These human entities know that the soul has existence. They do not simply believe it, but are beginning to know it as an absolute truth. And if you are a member of this fortunate company, you realize exactly what has brought about this change. You are beginning to feel inwardly that you are a soul, and you are beginning to live consciously in the soul world. Your chief abode is no longer in the body, but is in the spiritual state of your life. You have moved, literally speaking, from the external to the eternal, from the lower to the higher, and you are now living actually and truly in the higher. The result is that you are giving expression to the elements and powers that exist in the higher, and as a consequence, you are finding that physical conditions are changing to respond more and more perfectly to this expression of finer life from above. And here it is well to remember that we cannot give expression to the powers of the soul and to the superior qualities of the soul unless we live in the soul. So long as we live in the body, we have to depend exclusively upon material conditions, material forces, and material things. But the moment we begin to live in the soul, we become actually conscious of the greater power and the higher qualities that exist in the soul. And whatever we become conscious of, that we invariably express in a personality. The result of these higher conditions we all have experienced. We all have proven conclusively the greater truth that we can eliminate adverse physical conditions by entering a higher spiritual realization. For the moment we enter the Spirit, we become conscious of the power of the Spirit, and according to the law, give expression to that power through every part of mind and body. In brief, we send forth the light from the soul, and the darkness of the body must disappear. We have also found that this higher spiritual realization will invariably eliminate discord and adversity from the mind, increase the richness of life in every manner, and enlarge consciousness, both in the visible and the invisible, so that new kingdoms are added again and again to the world in which we live. We all have experienced and proven this great truth, and all these experiences are based upon the principle that we invariably give expression to the higher and the finer life of the soul the moment we begin to live in the soul. The principal idea to be considered in our study of this important theme is, conscious activity invariably takes place wherever we feel that we live. That is, if we feel that we live in the body, our consciousness will act principally in the body, and we will deal almost exclusively with the physical side of life. But when we begin to feel that we live in the soul, consciousness will become active among the spiritual elements and forces, and we will place in action more and more of those higher forces. Accordingly, we are no longer confined to the limitations of the physical, but may proceed to enter more and more into the conscious realization of the limitless life of the spiritual. The truth is that the moment we transfer the principal place of consciousness functioning from the body to the soul, we find that the higher spiritual forces will begin to express themselves, and thereby enlarge, enrich, and perfect the entire domain of human existence, physical, mental, and spiritual. In other words, wherever you are conscious, there you awaken activity. This is a simple truth that underlies this entire field of study. Therefore, when you are conscious of the spiritual side, you awaken spiritual activity. And when you awaken spiritual activity, you cause the expression of spiritual life and spiritual power, and in fact, the expression of everything that pertains to the wonders of the spiritual world. You have taken conscious possession of that higher, richer life, and have begun to bring forth that life into every part of your entire being. Thus your entire being will be lifted up, perfected, made perfect and higher, and existence itself on all planes more beautiful and more enjoyable. When we understand this great truth in all its fullness, we will begin to realize its many possibilities, and we must come invariably to the conclusion that if we should actually live for a number of years on the spiritual side of our consciousness, the spiritual expression of everything pertaining to the soul would become so strong that it would be impossible for adverse conditions to ever find place in the body. That is, the body would be so thoroughly filled with the life and power of the Spirit that no adverse condition could ever begin for a moment upon the physical side. This would be only one of the many wonderful things that would happen, and another would be the continuous enlargement of the mind, because the expression of the soul has a tendency to build up, to develop, and to further the growth of everything that is natural and true in any part of the mental world. All in all, therefore, we would realize perpetual health and physical perfection on the tangible side, and become giants of character, power, and talent on the mental side. But such a remarkable realization could not take place until we lived for a number of years on the spiritual side exclusively, and during every moment of existence. But there are many who may say that they have tried for some years to function entirely upon the spiritual side, and yet have realized neither physical emancipation nor higher mental attainments, a situation that may appear to contradict the truth of the statement just made. But we must remember that when we face the fact as it is in our own life and ask ourselves if we have always functioned on the spiritual side during every moment of existence, we must invariably reply that we have functioned on the spiritual side only at rare moments. We have not made the spiritual side the principal place of conscious activity, and that is the reason we have not gained the results that we think should have followed our efforts in that direction. If we would realize all the fruits of the Spirit, we must give every moment to the Spirit, and this we can do without interfering with the duties and privileges of the physical side of life. We can live continually on the spiritual side of consciousness, and at the same time give full justice to everything that may demand our attention on the tangible side. Beside, the more perfectly we live in the spiritual, the more life and power we will give to the body, due to the fact that greater spiritual activity and consciousness will arouse a greater abundance of life. And the more life we have, the more power, the more virility, the more strength, and the more harmony we shall have, and the better will be the health both of mind and body. The first step to be taken into the further understanding of truth, and in search of the secrets of the kingdom, is to train consciousness to live more and more upon the spiritual side of life. And here we must remember that we cannot understand the mysteries of the kingdom, no matter how much we may study or investigate the subject, until we consciously live in the soul. If we live in the body or in the mind, we cannot understand the spirit, and the mysteries of the kingdom will continue to be mysterious in every form and manner. But the moment we begin to realize that we are spiritual beings, and begin to live in the soul, so that we actually feel that we are living upon the spiritual side, we become conscious of spiritual things. And the moment we become conscious of spiritual things, we gain the power to understand spiritual things. The consciousness of the spiritual must come first. That is, we must actually be in the spiritual world before we can study the spiritual world. And therefore we must live in the soul, and consciously function in the soul, before we can proceed further in the search of truth. Having taken this first step, we will not only gain immensely, both physically and mentally, but we will also have entered consciously the real light of the spiritual world. And when we have entered the light, we shall be able to see clearly how to proceed further, how to apply the other side of science to all the mysteries of the kingdom. End of chapter.